I said, my name's Pete Apps. I'm 40 years old, and I came to London an astonishing 22 years ago, at the very end of the 20th century, in September of 1999, to start my degree at King's College London, because I wasn't quite bright enough for Oxbridge. And I started doing a couple of things alongside my degree that have been a sort of bit of a thread throughout my life. One of them was that I joined the Army Reserve, Territorial Army as it then was, with University London Officer Training Corps. And the other was that I started applying furiously for work experience, and I got some work experience at The Guardian and then The Sunday Times, and that led to a sort of parallel career in some of the first .coms doing healthcare data. We did the Dr. Foster Good Hospital Guide and did some of the sort of first healthcare data. And that led to me getting a job with Reuters at the age of 21, 22, just after the invasion of Iraq, and shipping out overseas as a young foreign correspondent, firstly in Southern Africa, where I had an amazing year, including covering a hemorrhagic fever outbreak in Angola. And then I upset my chain of command at Reuters because I wanted to stay overseas, and ended up getting a job in Sri Lanka on local pay, which was $10 a day, which is quite an achievement for someone who's joined a well-paid graduate scheme at the age of 21. And I arrived just in time for the outbreak of the fourth and final round of the Sri Lankan Civil War. I don't want to talk too much about that, but it was, terrible, fascinating. I worked with a really amazing group of of local reporters and international reporters. And they got killed in all kinds of really interesting ways, which I'll happily recount to women over a glass of wine. And then on September the 5th, 2006, I was on a reporting trip in eastern Sri Lanka, and I was in the front of my vehicle, dozing off because we started really early in the morning, and I woke up, and the windscreen was gone, and there was blood in my face, and I was lying over the front end of the vehicle, and the engine noise had stopped. And it didn't take me very long to work out what had happened. I couldn't feel most of my body. My neck hurt quite a bit, and I couldn't move. And when I came to shout out for help, I had very, very little voice, because I had knocked out C3, 4, and 5 of my spinal column, which, as most people know, is like one below a hangman's brake. So C1 or 2, stop breathing. You don't get to live unless you paramedics meet you in the first 2 minutes or so. Everything before that, you do get to live, but life suddenly becomes really, really complicated. And so I lay in the wreckage of my vehicle for a bit, and I thought, I'm not sure I want to be alive. I'm not sure that I'm going to die. In fact, I have a strong instinct that I'm not going to, which I now find really quite annoying. And that means I'm probably going to have to start heading home, and I might spend the rest of my life in my parents' living room. So, I had an interesting bunch of thoughts. I'd spent time as a watch lead on the Jubilee Sailing Trust, which does sailing for disabled people. So I knew enough inspiring paraplegics, so guys like some of those sitting in front of me, that I think I was arrogant enough to think I wouldn't have had a problem with that. In a sense, I knew enough people who were paraplegic and had good, nice, full, productive lives, and I was arrogant enough to think that I was at least that good. What I did not have at the time, on the other, was anyone that I could think of who had no working hands, arms, or legs, who had the sort of life that I felt I wanted or needed. And that was really quite alarming. And one of the things that becomes really obvious, and I understood it intellectually when Paul told me, but you realise pretty fast over the sort of intervening years. I got out of hospital and went back to work the day after leaving hospital, back with Reuters in Canary Wharf. I rebuilt my career. I was emerging markets correspondent during the financial crash, and wound up being their political risk correspondent for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which meant I did all the geopolitics analyst of the Arab Spring, and wound up as their global defense correspondent. But one of the things you realize pretty fast is that life is more complicated, particularly if you rely on this level of care, but there are a relatively limited number, it's a bit like being at war, there's a relatively limited number of things that will kill you and make your life difficult, and you really need to aim off for them. So in a war, it's like stray artillery shells, road moves, regardless of what bad people do to you, deliberate attacks. It's kind of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. With spinal injuries, it is urinary tract infections, it is pressure sores, it is sometimes lung stuff, kidney stuff that comes secondary to UTIs, and for those who are unlucky enough to have it, and I had a bout of this in hospital, and it was horrible, and I'm very lucky not to have it now, neuropathic pain. I woke up one morning, like 2 days after the injury, 3 days after the injury, and had full body phantom limbs, where literally it felt like everything south of my neck was in a vice. And luckily, it only lasted for a few months. but it was extremely unpleasant while it did, and some people have that for the rest of their lives, and they have to be able to function with that. And what SMSR does is it tries to find ways of dealing with that. And that's really valuable because you get these sort of small marginal gains will make a really big difference. And if you can actually keep people like me in the game, I mean, there's a whole bunch of people here with a variety of levels of injuries, pretty much all of whom do really, really interesting things, have really interesting things they want to do with their lives, and those small things, good wheelchairs make a huge difference. Everyone here is sitting on quite a sophisticated cushion. None of those existed 30 or 40 years ago. In my case, I drive a head control wheelchair. When I was first injured, head control wheelchairs were really not very good. And that meant that I was largely dependent on being a manual wheelchair being wheeled by other people because this arm didn't work for about a decade. Voice recognition software. I was incredibly lucky. I was injured in 2006, and by Christmas, I had taught myself to use voice recognition software. That probably wouldn't have happened if I'd broken my neck in 2004. When I went overseas, Wi-Fi didn't exist in 2004. In 2006, it was everywhere. Very weird time. But those things make a huge difference. Now I can operate on my own in a head control wheelchair. I've got an arm that's come back for no particularly good reason that allows me to punch buttons on lifts on the Underground, and I think I'm probably about as disabled as anyone who uses London Underground on their own, and that has been life-changing. Today I wandered off, met a friend for lunch, wandered back, all on my lonesome. I now live on my own for the first time in 15 years. Last time I lived on my own was in a hut in someone's back garden in Johannesburg. I moved my carers into a flat next door to my flat about a year ago, and it makes a hell of a difference, not least that it means they don't have to listen to loud sex from time to time. So that is, all kinds of things make a difference. And obviously the British government the welfare state put a large amount of effort into keeping me going. And I like to think it was a worthwhile investment because in 2015, after the first, what I think we will now refer to as the first Ukraine war, the British military decided that they wanted a range of specialists to do a variety of things, and I was one of the people who got called back to do what we sort of colloquially refer to as sort of information operations, emerging forms of warfare, that kind of stuff. So I did. They took me back, I think, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the kind of contract they were taking me on was unpaid, and the military is exempt from the Equalities Act, or what used to be the Disability Discrimination Act. And I was expected to do about 2 or 3 days a year. I did about 140 days. In my first 3 or 4 years training a really interesting team. I persuaded my brigade commander to put me through the regular captain's course, which I did in a manual wheelchair again, because I had to be carried in and out of a room every other day by the rest of my syndicate to attend lectures, because it was up and down some steps. And I was then mobilized full-time at the beginning of COVID. So for 13 months during Operation Rescript, I was lead analyst of a team doing some really interesting stuff, which I'm not going to then gloss over immediately and not talk about. And then since I demobilized on the end of March in 2020, at which stage the Russians mobilized 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. My team then got pulled onto a part-time basis doing stuff on that. So I am now not just the first person as disabled as me to hold the rank of captain in the British Army and a command appointment, but I'm also the first of a new sort of era of specialists to do that, which in this really complicated world is probably the most important thing I will ever achieve, and I wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't for all those small incremental steps that started at Stoke Mandeville in the autumn of 1945 when Gutmann set up his unit to stick back together a bunch of paraplegics and quadriplegics from the Second Front, all of whom were expected to die pretty quickly, many of whom did not, and who then built the Paralympics, went back to living their lives, in some cases married, went back, established that people could do these things, and built the modern world for disabled people and non-disabled people that we have today. So that's why it's important. SMSR is part of that journey. It really needs your money to keep doing all of those little things to make sure, like me and the other people in front of me, don't snuff it from a urinary tract infection in about a year's time, to make sure that we can endure and manage those pressure sores that will come up, and keep doing the various amazing things that people like Davey and Sophie and Philippe in front of me keep doing. So open your checkbooks. Do please come and talk to us. Talk to the research team about why it's important. Talk to the OTs at Stoke Mandeville at the back about why this stuff is important. And drink our generously provided food, drink and canapes, and give generously because it's really important. Thank you very much.